Folks, I am so excited to welcome to As the World Churns Dr. Sweta Chakraborty, who is a behavioral scientist and CEO of North America for We Don't Have Time. I like the name, and it also makes sense. Right now, House Republicans have rush through or jamming through what many have called and what I call on this show all the time a draconian budget, the big, beautiful bill that's filled with big, beautiful crap for the American people. Primarily, one of the areas that they have been hell bent on zeroing out, on rolling back, are the clean energy initiatives that have helped us try and tackle the climate crisis that we are currently living in, where we're seeing every season historic tornado season, historic fire season, historic hurricane season. Talk to us about why this is problematic at this time, at this stage of where we are, when climate change is no longer up for debate about whether or not it's happening, it's here, and what these rollbacks will do.
These rollbacks are gutting the American economy. That is the number one takeaway from what's happening here. That should be at the forefront of all Americans' minds because all the jobs that were being created, everything that was, in motion, forget it being a benefit to planet. Of course, we need to usher in a clean energy era. We need to transition as fast as possible. But even if we remove the benefit to the planet, we are still removing 830,000 jobs by 2030. Think about that for a second. These would have been cleaner, healthier, better wealth producing jobs for Americans. And they're just being taken away by this bill. So that is what's so asinine about this is first and foremost the economic detriment to the American people. It's going to cost the United States more than a trillion in GDP by 2034. I mean, talk about the highest debt ceiling we've ever had. This is just hurting America's economy, making us less relevant as a global player.
Mm.
And as somebody who's been traveling outside of the US because it's been relatively depressing here, as you and your audience well knows, we're not competitive on the global landscape anymore. We are just handing on a silver platter the future of jobs and markets and energy to China, right?
Mhm.
And we're also increasing, this is the most obnoxious of it all, is we're increasing the price of power and energy by 50% by 2035. And that means something like an additional $100 minimum for Americans on average. You're going to be paying $100 more every year in your energy bill. And we have the technology to reduce that cost for
Mhm.
Americans. We have the technology to reduce the cost and have global citizens access energy, and we are making it harder for people in the United States, the most developed country in the world. We're making it harder for them to access energy, and we're taking money out of their pockets because of it. So this ultimately is the biggest disaster coming out of this bill, is just how much of an economic hurt this is going to be to everyday Americans.
I've long thought that the conversation around climate change needed to be an economic one, that it was going to be an economic imperative because even if you just take, again, the disasters that we've experienced in this country, whether it be the fires that burned for weeks in California or the 23 or so tornadoes that touched down in the Midwest most recently, that the damage to those places amounts to billions of dollars, right? Billions of dollars that we know that this federal government through FEMA is no longer going to supply to states and pretty much saying like you're on your own, which is what Trump did to the state of Alabama when they asked for federal funds for recent storms. He said, I think that the state can manage it." Do you think though that that line of thinking would work better with the American people, not just those that are like creating policy or gutting policy, but that a message around jobs and creation and innovation would work better than just talking about what, again, it should be enough to say that the planet is dying and we're killing it and we're killing our ability to be able to live and thrive and we're creating climate refugees in this country and around the world. That should be enough. We know that it's not. So do you think that Democrats picking up, for instance, a economic message around climate change would be more resonant?
I think we've learned that the hard way. We see from the Kamala Harris election loss that that's the top line messaging that probably wasn't touted enough to really understand what is top of mind for everyday Americans. Ultimately, it is the money in their pockets, right? So I think the economic argument as a top line makes sense and should be sort of what we lead with. But then, as a behavioral scientist who studies communication, my ideal gold standard for communicating to Americans or just generally to audiences is to understand what they care about. And we haven't taken the time to do that, whether we're talking politics, climate change, infectious disease, all these different issues that ultimately their Americans' decisions are going to impact. We haven't taken the time to understand what their perceptions are before we communicate to them. So, what I mean by that is actually asking them the questions, right? What is it that you care about? We've understood, for example, let me give you an analogy to the climate
Mhm, mhm.
conversation, which is about eating less meat, right? Going from animal protein to more plant forward diets. And if you ask consumers why they make the switch, those who do, from animal protein to plant, they'll say one of three things. They'll say because it's a moral imperative that we stop factory farming and we treat animals better. That's one. And it could be some combination of all three of these, but it's usually one stands out more. So one is it's a moral imperative. The second one is that it's a sustainability issue, right? It's better for the planet that we do this. And then the third one is that it's a health issue. We want to just feel better. This is better for our bodies. So we have taken the time, animal agriculture industry and those who fight against it have taken the time to understand what these perceptions are for their special interest, whatever that might be. As a climate community, we haven't taken the time to understand what really drives human behavior to be able
Mm.
to communicate accurately. So if we segment audiences and ask, what is it that you care about as it relates to climate? Those who have experienced disasters or disaster adjacent, right? Those who have actually lived through some sort of hurricane or flooding event or drought will probably say that it is the risk of being in another disaster or
Mhm.
their first disaster. Those who haven't had that direct experience or adjacent experience, and this is the behavioral scientist in me again in understanding cognitive perceptions of what's a risk and what isn't. Those who haven't experienced those risks firsthand or can't understand them, we should make the economic argument to them, right? Because that's what
Mhm.
worries them first and foremost more. Or we make the health argument because air pollution is infecting them and their future generations. We're seeing increased allergies, we're seeing increased respiratory diseases. All of these sorts of things are examples of how we can communicate to and reach audiences based on what's important to them. And that's something we really need to step up and do better of. We shouldn't just throw spaghetti at the wall. Let's throw some social science at this, if anything, and understand perceptions to better communicate, to ultimately see behavioral change, like voting for the right president. We wouldn't be in this mess had we done that.
Correct. I think that that is really interesting because I feel like, to a certain extent, we hear, at least, that people are polled all the time, right? Like, that's how candidates, whether they be local, state, or national candidates, decide what issues they're gonna run on, right? They focus group people to hell. And I always say, I'm just like, are you focus grouping the right people, right? Like, whoever you believe to be this quote unquote, perfect example of American, who is that person? Where do they live? And what are their daily experiences? And so when you say that we need to ask them, what does that actually look like? And have you seen it done well, for instance, in the other countries that you travel to?
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be academic driven and rather than where everyone's looking for a quick fix, right? But we need to take the time to actually use our knowledge, especially in the United States where we have the best institutional research still to this day available out of anywhere on the planet. The United States should be driving research based communication and ultimately the outcome of that is better politicians being elected. And we are seeing pockets of that. We're not seeing a major collaborative effort because too many institutions are just out for themselves ultimately and just protecting their endowments. And it's not of benefit yet for institutions to collaborate. So we have to change that fundamentally. But we're seeing pockets of this. We're seeing, for example, Reverend Yearwood is running Climate Revival with Antonique Smith, and they're going to talk to underserved communities that have been historically disenfranchised, whose voices are not part of the conversation, that haven't been heard, and they are sampling these communities through trusted spokespeople like church leaders and, soccer moms, etc. Those that are community leaders and that are influential to these different audiences. If we took the time to do that, if we really segmented America and took random samples from these segments and then were able to communicate to them through trusted spokespeople, we would see such a change in understanding the perceptions of climate, the perceptions of what it means for repealing these policies. Because to the average American, it doesn't mean anything. They didn't see an immediate benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act, and they're not going to see an immediate harm. But if we're able to communicate what it means in terms of an equitable future for communities through trusted spokespeople, then we don't have to get into the nitty-gritty wonky policy, but we're talking big picture and ultimately garnering support for voting behavior and voting in elected representatives that are aligned to science and data and evidence, right? What is it that we want? Ultimately, what we want is politics and policy to align to science and evidence and data, not these alternative truths, alternative facts, but that we have science-based policymaking. That's the most secular, that's the most fair, that's the most equitable way forward. And the way to do that is to really sample randomly communities so that we can get an understanding of what the United States really looks like, what they care about, what their perceptions are. And it's going to vary a lot. What
Mhm, mhm,
communities in Cancer Alley care about are going to be health as it relates to climate and these
mhm,
policy actions that are happening at the federal level. What residents in Toms River, New Jersey care about is why they can't, why they can no longer live on these barrier islands that were flooded out during Hurricane Sandy, right? So we have to take the time to understand the different perceptions that exist in communities across the United States, find those trusted spokespeople, create relationships with them, and ensure that messages are being put forward in a way that are going to resonate and that behavior is going to be an outcome of that message. We don't need to hit people over the head with numbers. That doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. That's like communication science 101. Let's actually deploy trusted spokespeople instead. There's an idea.
Another thought that I want you to unpack for us as well, which is this, right? You spoke earlier about the fact that basically the Republican Party, with this rollback in climate, energy, research, science, like truth, data, all of these things, are creating a vacuum, right, in the world, one that China is readily walking into. Can you speak more to that and what China and other countries are doing and what you foresee happening with America's role in the world from taking this major step back?
Oh, this one hurts because America used to be where everyone wanted to go. I'm an immigrant, right? I'm the daughter of immigrants. And I remember just how proud our family in India was when my parents made it over to the United States. And then I was the first generation born here. And I think that existed pretty much until till the first Trump election, where the United States was still seen as the gold standard for ingenuity and for leading in the future, and the future
Mhm,
is a
mhm,
transition to clean energy. And we had in Biden's administration this goal, this could have been accomplished. There was a pathway to accomplishing full electrification of transportation by 2030. And so not only is that not happening, it has been picked up by China. And I think one of the most shocking, or rather, the biggest about face that I've experienced in my lifetime as being a daughter of immigrants is the United States going from being that gold standard and leading on all things transition to clean energy more recently, all things just innovation, right? Just innovation
mhm, mhm,
that is founded in science, that's entrenched in science, that supports a future that is brighter and more breathable and more equitable. All of these things that America stood for, that about face is probably the biggest shock
mhm,
to me in my generation, because I now see those same family members that were excited about us being Americans. They're saying how sorry they are for us. And a lot of the next generation, so my cousins, for example, and their kids are looking to Asia to travel to and study. And China is really picking up the mantle here in terms of this transition. Of course, there's still a massive polluter and there's human rights abuses. And the last thing we want is for China to become the global leader for those reasons on the transition to clean energy. But anywhere you go now in the world, you're seeing electric cars. China's really
Yep.
taken over
Yep.
Chinese electric cars. They've
Yep.
really taken over the global market for that. And they're really building the infrastructure around that as well. So if to purchase a electric vehicle, it's going to be a Chinese electric vehicle, and then all of the accessories and bells and whistles that comes with it is also being produced from China. So we really just handed over a lot of our potential market share and a lot of our potential future innovation, which is what attracts the best and the brightest from around the world. We've handed that over to China and other countries. So what does that mean for the future of the United States, right? As in what's in the pipeline? If we are not leading the future of clean energy, what is in our pipeline? What is America going to be known for? Some like throwback to some nostalgic future that is never going to exist again is just not going to happen. It's some delusional fantasy is
Mhm.
being propagated by the current Trump administration. And instead, the reality and the future of the planet and who leads it, we've handed over to Asia and China specifically.
I'll tell you, because I too am a child of immigrants, and I will say that it is I think that that for me is probably one of the most heartbreaking things about where we are, is
Exactly.
how my family came from Jamaica and how, like, excited and proud they have been of making it, right, into America, making it in America, and living out what they believed their American dreams were, only to now be in a space of thinking about going back to Jamaica because America is no longer safe.
Exactly.
But it also, again, what you're speaking to a lot of is the brain drain, right? Is the fact that the bright thinkers, the innovators, the change makers are not going to see America as a place that they are going to come for university, that they're going to come, for jobs. And so what does that mean? I think that it means that America becomes a shell of itself. I think that America is going to look more over these next 4 years plus, is going to look more like modern day Russia than it is going to look like anything else, which is depressing as hell.
So I was in Europe recently for work and I walked into a restaurant and it was a Russian waitress and she asked where I was from and I said, America. And she said, welcome to the club. That's what I heard. And I didn't process it immediately. I sat down and I was like, do you mean what I think you mean? And she's like, yeah, the world is viewing you the way the world views Russia. So welcome to the club. Audiences can't see our faces right now, but
Oh no, they'll see her like that is fucking awful.
since
That
when?
is
I mean,
awful.
within 4 years, we have joined the ranks of Putin's Russia. I mean, this is we were worried about coming back into the United States. We were talking about this,
Mhm.
and this is not the America that our parents brought us to. This is not
Yeah.
what we were excited about growing up in and having our children. We thought we were going to be propagating the American dream, and instead, we're watching it fold in front of us because ultimately, especially with this bill that just made its way through House, I mean, very tightly, right? But still, it made its way through the House despite the Republicans that recognize that so much of the benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act and all of the what's already been passed is benefiting Republican districts. It's the New York representative that is leading 20 Republicans to try and ensure that the repeal doesn't affect their districts because ultimately this legislation is creating jobs and benefit and economic opportunity. It's going in the right direction. And Republicans see that they just need to have a spine right now so that we are not we are not we are not bringing into reality a future that we can see what it would look like because it's Russia.
Yeah. Well, we will leave it there today, Dr. Chakraborty. I thank you so much for your time and just your honesty and laying out the picture of where America is headed for us. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.